I was certain if there was applause for me or for Austin, but I'll take them anyway. What I would like to say is I have this is a very nice, comfortable chair, and it's for those who know me that knows that my wife has decided she was away this weekend. So this whole time, as I see the former Minister of Finance here, Mr. Richards, knowing how busy Budget Week is, and my whole plan was to have a nice, restful, and relaxed weekend, but my 1-year-old and 3-year-old had other ideas. So a little bit tired this morning. That much being said, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's wonderful to see such a full room of people anxious to learn more about the budget of which we have put forward. Now, the budget statement, of course, supports the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year. And our highlights are that we are expecting that, I think the biggest news out of the budget statement is that we're expecting that we are not going to have to raise the debt ceiling this year, which I'm sure is great news and something that's welcome for everyone. And the fact is that, of course, we understand that the budget has 3 particular points. It has the revenue portion, it has the expenditure portion, and then it has the policies that are going to support that revenue and that expenditure. The expenditure which we're looking to tackle is that overall, when based on last year's projection, we're looking to take in about $20 million less in revenue than was projected last year. On current expenditure overall, we're looking to spend about $20 million more on current expenditure that was predicted last year. And then on the capital account side, on the capital budget, we're expecting to spend additional $20 million more than we had expected to spend from the original budget projections, which were put forward by the former government. So all told, that's about $60 million more in, as I call it, stimulus to the economy, but additional economic activity which will be coming from the government side. Now, I think what's most important when we look at the entire framing of the budget, I think one of the most important statements inside of there was a sentence that was buried towards the beginning. And it was something that came from the Bermuda Monetary Authority, speaking about the amount of money that is left Bermuda that has been earned inside of Bermuda. So when we came into office, we had lots of these various groups. One of the groups is called the Financial Policy Council. And the Financial Policy Council meets 3 times a year. And we discuss financial stability issues. And we also discuss issues related to the wider economy. So upon coming into office as Minister of Finance in our first meeting, I said I would like some ideas from you all on how to stimulate the economy, how to get more economic activity inside of the economy. And speaking about, can we do anything of a take on what is done in larger countries where, you have the issues of quantitative easing and be able to put some more money into supply to possibly generate some more domestic activity. Well, they went through, they came back, and after analyzing certain things, it was determined that to get some of those things done would be a little bit tricky given our currency board arrangement. But one of the things which they presented to me was this fact that in their studies through the Bank of International Settlements, they've seen that $3 billion of money that's been earned in Bermuda has basically left Bermuda to be invested elsewhere. Now that can happen through a number of particular reasons, but I think one of the most stunning and stark reasons is that we tell people to come to Bermuda for those persons who have permanent residency certificates who we say that can remain in Bermuda indefinitely, but yet we tell them by and large to invest your money elsewhere. So if we have a challenge where we have an economy that is stagnating, where we have an economy that is seeking investment, where we have an economy that we will look to possibly create some additional economic growth, the thought would be that if we're asking people to stay here indefinitely, we might want to give them additional options to invest their money inside the domestic economy to hopefully create additional conditions and impetus for economic growth. So what you've seen inside this budget is a realization of how do we get to those facts. But the most important thing, I think, from what Arthur has spoken about the issues of economic inequality. Because the view of my government is very simple. If you create those conditions for there to be additional economic investment inside of Bermuda, then the economic investment cannot just benefit those who have. It must benefit those who, for a very long time, have been on the sidelines and spectating the benefits of what international investment can do for Bermuda. When we look at the issues of income inequality, when we look at the issues of the great wage disparities, when we look at the disparities insofar as opportunity, when we look at the disparities insofar as earning, these are items which have to be addressed particularly. So though there are broad brush approaches inside of what this budget statement speaks about, insofar as our approach to how we're going to tackle this problem, we're going to make sure that the outcomes address the biggest challenge inside of the community, and that is income inequality. So someone had asked me a few weeks ago, how would I define success in my term as Premier Minister of Finance? I would term my success as the young kids who live in my constituency, who right now actually see very little hope or future of themselves inside of this country, can actually see a path of opportunity for themselves so that they can make a success out of their lives, and that success does not involve selling drugs. Plain and simple. And so that's how I judge whether or not we're going to be successful. And so when you talk about the investment that we're putting inside of education, when you talk about the investment that we're going to put inside of retraining, when you talk about the investment that we're going to put inside of making government more efficient, when it comes to information technology, cashless, moving to more of a cashless society, online payments throughout government, those are the type of things which we feel can not only empower our citizens, but we want to make sure that they get involved. A lot of persons have heard me say, and I guess I have to clear my interest as I'm one of those high-priced IT consultants that I speak about often. But instead of paying high-priced IT consultants to do this work, we can put our young kids, our Bermuda College students and others to build these type of things for the future. So when we're talking about developing a mobile application for the government, I don't want that mobile application to be developed by the IT consultants that are here. I want that mobile application developed by my Bermuda College students who are learning on how to do things and gaining practical experience inside the workforce. When we talk about the other things in the budget so far as planning for the future, when we talk about getting rid of height restrictions in the city in the economic empowerment zone, I saw that there was some commentary in the newspaper this morning, and I see the mayor somewhere back there, about the lack of, I see you there, thank you for your hand up. I see you there for the issue of consultation. Well, as you know, sometimes things in the budget have to be a surprise. But I think if there's one thing that everyone can say inside of the business community, the third sector, and government, is that this government has shown its willingness to consult and has shown its willingness to say, these are what our ideas are, let's have your feedback. So on the big issues of 60-40, on the big issues of relaxing height restrictions, on the big issues of, I know that there are some lawyers here, international law firms, and on the big issues of possible additional banking options inside of Bermuda. What the government has said inside of this budget statement is that we will consult. There are no final determinations which have been made, but the determination that the government has made, which overarches everything, is that we need growth. We need more jobs in Bermuda so that more Bermudians can work, and that there can be more economic activity here in Bermuda. Because as small business owners and everyone, we all want more customers for our stores. I'm sure we're here in the Chamber of Commerce. We all want more customers. We all want more economic activity. And that is where this budget is grounded. So from that perspective, it is about growth. And I'm anxious not only to hear your feedback on the things which have been presented in the budget, but as I've always said whenever I present to the Chamber of Commerce, meeting quarterly with the Chamber of Commerce executive and or otherwise, I want to hear your ideas on how we can get more jobs based in Bermuda. We have a lot of work to do. I know that the Junior Minister is working with a number of stakeholders inside the business community to figure out how we can give additional payroll tax incentives to have more jobs coming to Bermuda, to have more departments possibly relocating some of the departments here inside of Bermuda, and we are going to do whatever it takes to facilitate the increase of the number of jobs in Bermuda. That is the number one priority. That is what we measure by, and it is our belief that the budget statement that we've laid out supports that particular objective. So with that, I'm anxious to hear other follow-up comments and look forward to your questions and an interactive discussion on this budget. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit more about your thought process there, and maybe we'll get a reaction from some of the members of the panel.
Thank you, Arthur. What I'd say is that what we have to do is that we have to find a way to reduce payroll taxes and substitute those with other revenue measures inside of the economy. I think that if you just go with classic economic theory, if you tax something more, you'll get less of it. And payroll tax is without question a tax on jobs. You know, whenever you create a job, you will instantly be paying additional tax on it. And I'm not entirely certain that's the best way forward, especially when we realize that the solution to a lot of our problems is additional jobs inside the economy. There's always that whole thing that correlation is not causation, but you can map the inverse of the increase in payroll taxes to a decrease in jobs. Now, am I saying that they are related? No. But I do believe that if there was less of a tax placed on a job when it was created, you may find yourselves with more jobs, and that's what we want to get to.
Thank you. And John, from a chamber perspective, I think you touched on this earlier, but perhaps you could give a reaction from the membership.
I think the more disposable income our members have to spend in this economy, the better we're all going to be. So I think without question, there have been cases in the past where payroll tax has been increased and that has been reversed in following year's budget. So I think we had the legacy of seeing the impact that increases in payroll tax have on the economy, and it hasn't been a positive influencer. So I think you have to give this government credit for recognizing that was the case, and they've done a good job in not following through on phase 2 and broadening the tax base. So I think absolutely this is a good move for Bermuda.
Very good. And again, let's touch on an area that you covered, John, a moment or two ago. Obviously, the movement from 60-40 to 40-60 was seen by many as a courageous step. Some might argue that it didn't actually go far enough. How might you express how you balance your thought processes around that?
Well, the thought process goes, as I said at the very beginning, it's a way of figuring out how to get more investment inside the economy, and also recognizing that at some points in time we have a large amount of persons that are here. We give the permission to stay indefinitely, but they don't have the ability to participate inside the economy. I mean, 60-40 rule means that PRCs who can stay here forever cannot be majority shareholders in domestic-owned businesses. And that's kind of a dichotomy. So that's where it started from. But I think what is important is to recognize is that that 60-40 is a very complex issue. And when you're talking about complex economic changes, it doesn't mean that you just throw everything out at the same point in time, because the unintended consequences will be very severe. So we're going to take a very slow pace with it. We're going to have a decent consultation period where we get back the concerns which will happen and which are valid concerns. As I said, you'll have both sides. You'll have those that are without question the entrenched interests, who 60-40 inevitably protects. And then you'll have others who may not be entrenched interests, but maybe entrepreneurs, maybe others who have been struggling to survive. And the thought of additional capital competing against what they have represents a threat. So what we have to do is that we have to recognize that the competition is good, but we don't want to all of a sudden unleash it so that it causes additional dislocation inside of our economy.
Thank you. Robert, do you have a view?
Well, yeah. Our primary problem is the scale of the outflows, investment outflows that are occurring. That's a $3 billion figure that you quoted in 3 years. That's a net figure. So that's the outflows minus the inflows. And for every dollar that leaves Bermuda to invest in other countries, if we're going to maintain our level of investment in the island, we have to attract an additional dollar in. But we got into trouble through too quickly implementing capital market liberalization without it was commonly done around the world. But this has to be discussed and thought about. We have to be very careful about the unintended consequences. And we have to, I think for the Bermudian people, we should be putting together some sort of analysis of the benefits and the costs. We want to look particularly at the costs. And perhaps there should be some limitations in the relaxation of 60-40.
John, did it go far enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good start. I think it's a bold move for Bermuda. So I think it remains to be seen whether it did go far enough. I think it's up to the Premier and the team to communicate to Bermuda why this is important for the country. It started on Friday. It's a good move. So I wouldn't be critical of it not going far enough. I think we have to give credit for the fact that it was done in the first place.
Thank you. Sometime during the course of last week, government held a press release on the newly formed Tax Reform Commission, and there is certainly a high degree of expectation from the reporting from that commission in 6 months' time. I think many across our community would feel that wholesale tax reform is required, and that the system is outdated and doesn't serve us to the best of that which it could. If the panelists were in the shoes of the Tax Reform Commission, I wonder whether there are one or two things that you might think are important to concentrate the efforts of that commission on. So maybe I'll start with you, Robert, again, and then we'll move back around the panel.
What in our basic reform of the tax system?
What nuggets would you focus on? If you were on the panel?
Well, there's a fundamental rebalancing that needs to occur, and so we can look at this from a number of different perspectives. One would be, economists typically look at tax systems, and they break all the taxes into the incidence of taxation into either taxation of capital, taxation of labor, and consumption taxes. Our system has been way too heavily orientated towards consumption taxes and taxation of labor, and there's far too little taxation of capital in Bermuda. So that rebalancing needs to occur. Another area of rebalancing would be if you take a look at the taxation of the household sector and the corporate sector in Bermuda. The corporate sector isn't paying nearly their fair share of taxes. But we need to reduce the taxation of households in relation to the taxation of corporations. I personally am not in favor of taxation of corporate profits. And then looking at the cross-section of the corporate sector in Bermuda, our taxation of finance is way too low in comparison to its significance in the economy, the size of the economy, and the risk that it is now subjected Bermuda to in terms of our susceptibility to economic shocks of financial crises from overseas. The taxation of international business and local companies was first implemented in 1966. They formed 7% of our government revenues. They have not increased since. And we're still taxing hotels. We're still taxing the occupancy of hotels. That's amongst the corporate revenues. It's a significant portion of the government's revenue. To me, that makes no sense. And then finally, amongst the household sector, because of this, of these imbalances, we have far too regressive taxation system. If we make those changes, I don't think we'll ever be able to move to a position where it's significantly progressive, but we need to at least eliminate the regressivity.
Scott, would you like
Great.
to?
Well, certainly, we would be, from the hospital standpoint, very interested in tax reform that ends up creating more jobs and increases the population of the island, because it comes straight back to the sustainability of healthcare. Bermuda is hitting that age demographic bubble pretty much like the rest of the world. But in the past 5 years, with the loss of feet on the ground, that has contributed to the upward pressure on health costs for everybody who remains on island. Because remember, we basically lost a lot of the younger, healthier persons that were paying into the system. So any tax reform that brings boots back onto the ground, I think would be very much supportive of. We are watching the sugar tax debate quite closely. The fact of the matter is, if there were oil wells off of South Shore that were dirtying up the beaches, I'm pretty sure we'd be taxing the oil wells. So with the high level of commitment or financial commitment that the government has to certain segments of the population, then there may be opportunities to look at tying tax reform to also underwriting the health care for those groups.
When we look at raising revenue for government, there are a few ways of looking at how to increase the amount of revenue the government can get from taxes. And one is to raise the rates of taxes, another is to broaden the base of tax. And then the third way to look at it is the efficiency of collection of tax. And I was really pleased to see in the budget some discussion about supporting the tax commissioner's office and doing a better job of collecting taxes that are already there. I think it's really important to be able to very efficiently collect the taxes that we already have. And so if I were on the tax commission, I would be looking at how to make sure that we collect our taxes efficiently in the first place before adding new taxes.
And obviously, again, for illustrative purposes, the total debt out there from tax collection is in the region of about $270 million. So clearly an area that would benefit from some focus. John, do you think Bermudians at large fear the tax man, or is that something that could culturally be changed? Fear the tax man.
I don't think they fear the tax man. I think, I think obviously nobody wants to pay any more tax than they're paying right now. So I think this budget has done a very good job of taking away the fear that I think a lot of people might have been facing with the debt levels that we have to pay back. So I think, I don't think they fear the tax man. I just want to pick up on one of Scott's points about increasing the population of Bermuda. I think we can talk about redistributing the tax base, which is obviously very important, but when you have a $2.5 billion debt and unfunded pension liabilities and health of another probably $1.5 billion, $4 billion of debt to pay back is a lot of money with the existing number of people we have in Bermuda at the moment. So we're very encouraged when we hear the Premier talk about, the absolute necessity to add more people into our tax base in Bermuda to be able to pay back the debt. So we're really hoping that there's much more discussion in our community around, what is the grand plan? Why do we need many more people in our community? Some people look back to the sort of pre-2007 period and say, there was just so much traffic on our roads, there was too much pressure on infrastructure. But the reality is that, we can't have the same number of people paying into our tax base today and really believe that we can pay back our debt without increasing the levels of people in our community. So what's the value proposition to bring people and businesses to Bermuda, and what does that mean for the infrastructure of Bermuda? So I think the tax commissioners or the tax commission is important to discuss, but we really have to have a bigger discussion about having more people in Bermuda to pay into our tax base.
Can I make a comment?
But if I may, I think that, and John, we've had this conversation numerous once in time, I think that the discussion gets lost. This is not a discussion about people. This is a discussion about we need to create more jobs in Bermuda. And I think that's where we get unbalanced. Because the discussion we start talking about more people automatically starts raising people's eyes. And that's what we have to avoid. This is about how do we create more jobs? How do we get Arthur hire more people here? How do we get the F&M hire more people here? How do we get more job space inside the economy? That's where the conversation needs to go. So when we spoke about the whole issue of the Tax Reform Commission, at the very basis of it, it said to look at our system of revenue collection and taxation to make the Bermuda economy more competitive internationally. And that means that we have to figure out a way to make it work. But I don't think this conversation should always be about people, because as we've had the conversation many times before, John, if you put 2,000 people on Front Street right now, where are they going to work? And that's the key. We need to figure out how we're going to create more jobs inside of the Bermuda economy and supporting the creation of those jobs, which will naturally allow Bermudians to be employed, which will naturally allow Bermudians overseas who have left to come back to be employed, and then other persons also to fill those jobs. But I think we need to look at it from a job perspective, because it is a different conversation when we talk about increase the number of jobs on island as opposed to increase the number of people on island.
Thank you. And Mr. Premier, if we might try and expand that point a little bit further, do you have a rough sense of how many more jobs you're looking for, either relative to today in percentage terms or in number terms?
I'll look over and smile at Bob. If we were to get back to, in the near term, if we were to get back to where we were in 2008, I don't think there'll be a single person in this room that'll be unhappy. I mean, let's start where we were before we go further. But the fact is, some of these conversations which we're talking about, whether it's debt, whether it's deficits, whether it's revenue, whether it's healthcare, whether it's other things in support of population. I mean, if we had half the jobs that we've lost, so that puts us back to 37,000, I mean, we'll be in a far better position than where we are right now. So that's where the focus has to be. And that's why every time I have the conversations, whether it's the chamber, whether it be a beer, whether it be a BIC or others, the conversation is always, what are your thoughts for having additional jobs created here inside of the Bermuda economy? That's the only thing that, in my opinion, really matters.
Premier, you talked on Friday about the fluidity of money and investment across the world. Doesn't respect borders. I think you used a phrase similar to that. One can analogize this obviously also to the workforce, and increasingly we're finding that services are being performed in many different parts of the world and also don't altogether respect boundaries. There were clearly some disappointing results last week from the Ministry of Education around performance in mathematics, but I wondered if you might spend a few moments just talking about your vision for how we can go from the situation today, which I think we all would agree is an education system that isn't succeeding for the children of Bermuda, to one that ultimately prepares them to actively be able to compete with people around the world and prepare them for the workforce of the future.
I would say that it's probably not enough time to discuss education this morning, but in the broad sense, we have to do better. We just have to have better outcomes for our education system. And that does not necessarily involve just about money. I mean, I don't think that people will say that there's certainly space for additional investment inside of our education system, but I don't think that money is the biggest problem. I think the challenges are that we have to make sure that we deliver and we have better outcomes from our public education system. I believe the minister is doing excellent work thus far. I think that the strategic plan that the Department of Education has laid out, I think will be beneficial. I encourage people to be a participant of that plan. I see the chairman of the Board of Education sitting in front of me right there, Mr. Curtis Dickinson. But it is a process. But if we do not increase or raise the outcomes which come out of our public education system, of course, these are going to be challenges that we'll have long term. And those challenges manifest themselves in the antisocial behavior which we see. Lack of opportunity comes from the fact of being not prepared for today's economy. And so we need to not only focus on education out of just the public school system, but you'll also see a very big focus on retraining and continued education for the adult population. Because the segment of which has been affected most in this recession, people will say, black males work in construction. Well, yeah, that's a part of it. But there's a large part of it, like where we have, as I would call them, I'll call them middle-aged females who've seen their jobs outsourced. And now clerical or what's it called jobs, and now have very little space because they're competing against people with students coming back home with college degrees who can afford to work for far less. And so that is the challenge in which we have to bridge as well. So it's a question of what do the jobs for the future for those persons look like. But when we talk about the opportunities which can be offered in the new economy, when we talk about the opportunities that can be offered in the technology space, what Bermuda does well, we can build upon that. So if we're known for a place for compliance, if we're known for a place where you can actually run a clean jurisdiction, How do we start positioning Bermuda to kind of offering the new services to the world? Where we talk about jurisdiction as a service. How do we say what we do well in Bermuda, we can scale that and offer that to more citizens and to more countries around the world to enable people here to have more opportunities to work?
Thank you. And with your technology background, you're aware perhaps more than most as to how fast things are moving. Do you have a sense whether we have enough time?
I certainly think that we have enough time. The thing is that we have to act. And one of the things, as I said, the government gets criticized for collaborating a lot and consulting, but I think that there is certainly space for collaboration and consultation here. So if there's 4 different people looking to build some type of accelerator or some type of incubator, I'm sure that most people will say that Bermuda doesn't need 4. We probably need 1 or 2. And so that's the type of things where government can lead to marshal the forces of people who are looking to do things inside of this space, to make sure that we do it in a unified fashion, so that we're not attempting to duplicate efforts, and that we can actually make those type of advances. We're certainly not too late when it comes to some of the things that are happening so far as technology. As the Minister of National Security here, I joke to call him the Minister of Blockchain, but that's basically what he's been tasked with doing over the past 3 months, and we are looking to make advances inside of that space. And it offers a fantastic opportunity for Bermuda, but it also carries its risks. We're going to get it right, but getting it right means that we need to consult, we need to make sure we're working hand in hand with the regulators and hand in hand with industry. But if we want to have growth, then we have to be open to the things that will be able to provide that type of growth.
Thank you. Let's change tack a moment and give you a bit of a rest. Obviously, healthcare, cost of healthcare in Bermuda is again one of the more significant challenges that we all face. Scott, you mentioned earlier a clinical services plan, but what more can you tell us about the clinical services plan, and how might it be part of solving some of the challenges that Bermuda faces with respect to healthcare?
Certainly. The clinical service plan is really took a look at all of the available national data as well as DHB data to get a better view of the demographics, the utilization of healthcare services, as well as the underpinning disease sets. So particularly with the very, very high level of chronic diseases in Bermuda, approximately at least 30% of our population has diabetes, and these are the things that are driving high costs of healthcare. And they have a real impact on systems such as the hospital. The BHB services 165 patients on dialysis. For a population of our size, we should only have 65. Okay, that's 100 persons on a per capita basis over. So that's not something that the hospital is looking to spend money on. That is coming from the demand side from the community. Okay, and so there's a lot that goes into resolving that issue, starting with better wellness and taking care of ourselves. And that's one reason why we pointed to the fact of the public health and health awareness helping to reduce the demand for services. Next, persons 65 and over account for 38% of all of our cases and 65% of our patient days. Okay? Seniors are 30% more likely to have additional comorbidities and on average spend 12.6 days more per hospital visit. Going at this rate, we've identified that in 5 years' time, the hospital will need another 75 acute care beds to accommodate that volume. And that's something that the hospital, nor the government, nor the community can afford. So the clinical service plan is critical to start looking at what the risk factors are and starting to align all of the resources within the community to decompress that demand that is coming down the pipeline. Otherwise, it will drive up the cost of healthcare further. But again, at this point in time, we believe we can arrest it, working together.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to comment on healthcare? Jessica, you mentioned earlier that you were working with the Chamber and an external third party. I think you mentioned, was it Cornell University?
Cornell and Queen's University.
Would you be prepared to expand a little bit more on what you're aiming to do there and how that could be of benefit to Bermuda? Thank you.
So we're still in process on the study. It's not complete, so I can't give you the answers yet. But back in the spring, we were contacted, Kendria is down here, the Chamber was contacted by a team of executive MBA students from Cornell and Queen's Universities who need to do basically a free consulting project for a real-world client. And we convinced them that Bermuda would be a fantastic client for them. And we gave them the task of looking at Bermuda's economy and considering how we could diversify and grow our economy. So that's a task we set for them. And we think the real benefit of it is that these are all, people from the US and Canada, and most of them have never been to Bermuda. So they give us a real external view of Bermuda. And they don't have that dog in the fight, and they're not stuck in the weeds like the rest of us are. So they're giving us this amazing external view. And for me, the light bulb moment in our meetings with them is that they talked a lot about innovation, which aligns very nicely with what the government is looking at doing. And when they talk about innovation, they talk about it not as innovation and growth in one particular sector like fintech or insurtech or incubators. They look at innovation as a culture. It's a mindset, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of looking at obstacles, and rather than saying, these are the 100 reasons we cannot do this, innovation is looking at an obstacle and saying, here are the 100 ways we could get around it. And that's a mindset, it's a culture, it's a way a society and an economy function. And if we want to be innovative as a country and as an economy, I think that's where we need to go. And I see in the budget the way the Premier speaks, I really believe that he is moving in that direction. I think that's really exciting. So. Great,
thank you. And of course, Bermuda First has been reformed with the mandate essentially around growth. So one would presume that the study will be shared in due course with...
Absolutely, and actually Bermuda's a small place, so John is actually on Bermuda First as well, so we're... being president of the chamber, that gives us a very close link with Bermuda First, makes it pretty easy for us to hook it in there. And I think all the people on Bermuda First are volunteers. They all have full-time jobs and pretty big full-time jobs, so I'm not sure any of them has the free time to do the kind of groundwork that these students did for us for free. So we're hopeful that this study will give them a bit of a head start.
Great. There have been about 6 or 7 questions around US tax reform, so I should therefore table it. Premier, you covered a number of the external factors that could be described as headwinds. We also have, obviously, mergers and acquisitions in the insurance and reinsurance sector. Perhaps maybe first, as a two-part question, would you give a perspective on what you perceive the impact of US tax reform is, and then maybe expand more broadly on how sensitive you think the budget is to some of these wider external factors?
Well, I can answer that. I'll answer the second one first. Okay. Sensitivity of the budget to those external factors being the European Union, mainly the CFATF assessment, and then US tax reform. When it comes to the CFATF assessment this year, you'll see some additional resources that are in place. So you'll get down to the budget debates. Some people might be, well, why the Ministry of Legal Affairs, if they're cutting certain funds, why are they getting more money? And that's because there are certain responsibilities and obligations for ongoing expenditure to make sure that we are living up to the standards for the CFATF assessment, which are necessary. Also, the issue when it comes to the European Union, and speaking about a permanent representative place inside of Brussels to make sure that we can be on top of the issues that we face there. On the matter of US tax reform, to answer that question, what is my assessment of US tax reform? I would say that my assessment of US tax reform from the Bermuda perspective is overall negative. And I don't think that that's something that anyone can dictate. If all other things being equal, I think that Bermuda would be a better place without U.S. tax reform, the U.S. tax reform that happened, than we are now. The fact is that it has happened. We know what we have, and the question is how are we going to work forward from that perspective. There will be different, as we all know, different impacts for different parts of the economy, or parts of maybe the insurance industry that you are a part of. So for some, it is decidedly more negative than others. What we have to also realize is that there may be opportunities presented. And what the government is saying is that where there are opportunities for possibly restructuring that can make better use of the Bermuda platform, then we will make sure that we facilitate any type of restructuring that will add additional jobs here to the Bermuda economy. But overall, I don't believe that it's a positive, and we have to be very mindful of that fact. So when you said how did that factor into the budget, it's probably not the best idea to be raising taxes when everyone around the world is cutting it.